That's the improved version. We still rolling? Well, all right. I'm going to attempt to update one of the maps, press out a few wrinkles that I put in the map to start with, or some other description, and that is this: that you could look at man as having a first, second, and a third order of sentient systems, creatures, who apparently at this level, and we can't stop here and argue this, but by all visible appearance, it can either be noted, it can be recorded, it can be measured, that these creatures, these systems in this case, display apparently consciousness and or sensation, that they apparently, observably, will react to stimuli that also apparently comes from without, as opposed to if there was inorganic matter, and I'm not going into that tonight, since everything at this level appears to be organic. But it appears to be systems, or it could have been creatures, that apparently respond directly to outside stimuli as opposed to observably being able to see any reaction that a rock may have if you tickle it or stick it with a branch. So we got that, right? You could look at man. Each man is having, or divided into, a first, second, and third order. Now, the third order is inchoate. It is not a reality, and I'll just hit on it in a little while, but the first and second order is what I want to point out. These orders both can use and interpret the stimuli and the information coming in to man through the five senses. And so it's like two separate systems inside my old nervous system diagram. But now, I want to point out that each of these systems are overlapped, but you can observe a particular phenomenon, aspects of which we have already observed and talked about, but I'm going to remap it anew. That each of these two systems, the first order and the second order system, could each be looked at as having, literally, their own brain, which I am going to name for you. The first order sentient system, man's nervous system, would be as though it were being directed, that the input was being interpreted by, and it would be right here in my system, my drawing, a red brain. That would be from the nervous system up to my line. That it is as though you had a complete, if this was possible, separate nervous system with its own director, with its own interpreter, with its own brain. Above the line, I mean at the line, I should say, I don't know whether this will show up, would be the brain. Is it showing up at all?
Yes.
This would be the second order, and it would be right there at the line, a yellow brain. The third order would be up here. The third order right now is simply, as far as city people, as far as people only operating by the combinations of the first and second order, the red and yellow brain. The third order is man's imagination, man's dreams of enlightenment, a higher state of consciousness, being wise, being awakened, being blown away, being with a new mind, being a man reborn. That would be the third order. I guess somebody's going to finally, let me get this out of the way, since I have named them the red and yellow brain, wonder if there isn't a blue brain, like an emotional brain. Not really. Not based upon the division that I'm giving you of there being what amounts to two separate systems with two separate brains. Staying with that mapping, what you would have would be not a blue brain, really. It would be a blue system. There would be a network encompassing those two brains, connecting them, inner talk, and anything else that would not fit into such a description, which I'm not going into that either, in case you think there's anything that does not fit. I'm not saying there is. The first two brains, first and second order, have some very interesting aspects to them. Some of the examples I can make up are nothing strange at all, but they have never been mapped in this way. And to give you a hint along the way before I spring the word again somewhere in the next few minutes, I'm still talking about this area of contrast. These two brains are of different ages. They are operating simultaneously, the systems are. And if you recall in times past, for a few minutes or hours or days, I even made a description of man as that factory, if you recall. And I had him split up, and I was referring to the areas of working down in the mines, down in the warehouse, down in the foundries, then the advertising department, then research and development, the managerial levels. And I pointed out to you, quite properly, that it is fallacious from a city view, from a three-dimensional everyday view. It is absolutely groundless, and for someone attempting to undergo a revolutionary jolt, it is dangerous. That is, it wastes your energy and it distracts you to believe, to operate on the assumption that one of these brains, one of the systems, one of the levels in man the factory, per se is superior, is better. In a 4D world, there's some validity to that, but in a 3D world, there is none. At the very least, it is useless, and at the very worst, it is absolutely distracting and disorienting because it gives you everyday information. These two systems, these two brains, we will assume that anyone now living in the city, anyone who is literate, anyone who would pass by the shoddiest standard description of being civilized, anyone who would just barely fit through, still has these two systems in operation simultaneously, and they have two brains operating, my red brain and my yellow brain. Now, some of the aspects I was going to mention. The yellow brain, all of this, I'm using 3D terminology, and it seems to be at times very clear-cut. But those of you who have now not been around the block, but been around the city limits, know that it is not necessarily that clinical. The yellow brain invented speech, but the red brain uses it also. And it uses it in a way that some time back, I tried in passing several times to mention to you that there were two kinds of speech going on between humans. And at that time I referred to it as the conveyance of information and the conveyance of feeling. to two kinds of education, that apparently based upon facts and that apparently based upon social behavior. That is the red and yellow brain. But something has happened with the brains and with human speech. Now, I said that it was not this clear cut, but it's no mistake to start off this clear cut until you see it, if it takes you 30 seconds or 30 days or 30 months. If man had stopped at the red brain level, we would not be talking. The red brain by itself would have never developed speech and abstract memory, and is being able to apparently chew up energy from that which is already, from one view, dead and gone. But almost as soon as the yellow circuit, the yellow brain developed speech, the red brain began to use it. But it does not use it for the same purposes that the yellow brain does. To say the what? Least. The red brain, the first order system, uses words itself, hears words, primarily on the basis of instinctive behavior. The actual conveyance of information, as the yellow brain would call it, as more intellectual people would call it, is, to say the what, least, secondary. When you're walking down the street and my proverbial pickup truck goes by and somebody hollers, "Fuck you, fatso," and you tense, it is the red brain that heard that. The yellow brain, if we could separate them that much, and then some people out there in the street, as you should know, some of you are verging on it, some people are directed, are wired up to be run so predominantly by one brain or the other. There are people, quite ordinary people, out there in the world, that can be walking down the street and somebody go by in a truck and say, "Fuck you." And the person thinks, "I wonder why they said that to me. Did they mistake me from someone else?" If this was cartoon time, of course, that would be the proverbial intellectual person. And that the truck could back up and said, "Didn't you hear me? Aren't you mad?" And the guy thinks, "How interesting. Sir, let's discuss this. You must think I'm someone else." If things could be divided that precisely and that cleanly, the yellow brain certainly has a theoretical knowledge, as the yellow brain would call it, that if I'm not being mistaken for someone else, then there is some attempt here by this other person to convey something to me other than information. "Fuck you" is not information to the yellow brain. But to the red brain, "fuck you" is a world of information. And you have man's world full of discussion. You have it even in our judicial system. It changes, it undergoes mutations as to how much an ordinary man can be required to accept in the way of verbal abuse. The police, then people together. Is it required that an ordinary man accept someone, a stranger on the street, saying "fuck you," or is that a form of battery? Has the man actually been attacked? Now, if we could divide up part of man's institutions, in this case, let us say the judicial system of some state, into a yellow brain run judicial system as opposed to a red brain run. Or if there was one judge somewhere that right now had the temporary last say as to, all right, I'm deciding in an appeals process that one man telling another, "fuck you," is no cause for the man who received the insult to physically strike the other. That would be a yellow brain judge. Because then if we move to another state, or if we move to a different time, and another judge, if there was one individual somewhere, and he had the right to review some case like this, and he said, it is a known fact, even in civilized circles, that the term fuck you is just this side of a physical assault, that someone is attempting to convey to another person the harshest of feelings. There is no doubt that one person is attempting to incite in the other feelings of horror, of danger, of being insulted. Therefore, I find that that is a form of assault. That the first person hit the second one, only he hit him with words. It's a known fact. Any reasonable man would be upset about this. That is a red brain judge. That is a red brain man speaking to him instinctively the truth. The words don't matter. It's only yellow circuit people that will sit around and write tomes or have long discussions about fuck you. We're taking a euphemism for sexual intercourse. The man in the truck, this first stranger, he did not physically mean fuck you, or what does the term does not really convey information. Does he say, I hope someone fucks you? I should jump out of this truck if I wasn't in a hurry and I would fuck you. The term fuck you, it doesn't even say anything. It's saying sexual intercourse you. It makes no sense. How can you be mad at that? The red brain, as I said, had it not had developed on top of it, a yellow brain would have no language. And so the matter of fuck you would not come up. If you had Homo sapien without a yellow brain, there would be no question about verbal insults, verbal battery, because they would not be talking. But since the yellow brain did develop speech, the red brain uses it, but it uses it in a very crude manner, a very direct manner, a very, for our purposes, for civilized purposes, an out of date. But that's on the basis of still looking at time in a 3D manner. But it would be out of date. That is part of right now humanity, and I say right now being the history of man, of some part of life's body, saying, my God, what's happened? We're still killing each other, we're still attacking each other, we're no more civilized now than we were in the days of Socrates. And they blame it on society, they blame it on our institutions, and all we're talking about is the internal conflict still going on between these two brains. The red brain finds absolute, specific, immediate information in words, but as far as it being factual information, to say the very least, what it obtains from it, what it needs from it, what it can take from words, is secondary. And the term fuck you, go to hell, so's your mama, convey specific information that verges just this close on being absolutely nonverbal. Because it is, as opposed to reason and logic, it is instinctive. But who would have ever thought there is no other way to expect this, although it's been going on for thousands of years, but there is no way that you would have ever expected this, simply making a biological, anthropological, zoological survey of all the other creatures. Nobody can be insulted except somebody that's got two, at least got the first and second order of these systems. If it was just, if man had just suddenly sprang up being a yellow-brained creature, then he could not be insulted. The closest thing to an insult, and I'm stretching it now, but try to get you to glance in a certain way, this is not really true, but the closest, if a man was just of the second order, if he just had a yellow brain, the closest he could be insulted would be somebody to give him faulty information and him find out about it. But still he wouldn't be mad. But I'm just saying that would be the closest to him being insulted. Or for him to have a correct answer to something and somebody else go, no, it's not, and refuse to see it. Be too dumb to see it. Before I point out more aspects of this, I want you to understand, in each and every body, these two systems are in operation. And the more that the closer you are to the bush is born, the closer you are to actually, without any doubt, belonging in this, in a sense, the more that the two systems are in operation, and you can observe it without any great effort. There's nothing occult about it. But still, I want you to understand that there is an order in which they have power and precedent and age, and yet they operate simultaneously. And it would be as though, if we were looking at man as a factory, as that factory, as this nervous system. The red brain, horizontally speaking, is older. But it would be as though there were a factory that it was set up, and at the time it was set up, the only light available was kerosene lanterns, let's say. So they use that. But now, time has marched on, and they have higher stories, and now upstairs they've got computers, electron microscopes, all kinds of exotic hardware that runs on electricity. But they have never electrified downstairs. The basic lighting every day, when the guys that work upstairs in the yellow brain department, when they come to work, they have to come in downstairs, or if they don't come in, this up here will not operate if this down here closed up. That's where they turn out the heat, that's where they generate the power to turn it into electricity, but down here they're still operating on kerosene. They have not switched over. It just moved from this operating at one level of energy, and as it developed into another one up here, it did not seep down in some way. They did not switch over from kerosene lighting and heating down here. They did not switch over. They stayed that way. That is the nature of these two simultaneous systems operating. The nature of their ringleader, as I said, in a sense, actually being two separate brains, two separate ways to interpret stimuli and information, to interpret the molecular effects of information coming in the five senses. So try and think about that you've got people down here that have been operating with a certain kind of energy, and for all intents and verbal purposes, they have not changed. And from one real view, it's more efficient that way. At least you think that my allegory has some flaw in it, that, well, they should keep up with the times. Now think about it. If down here, all the basic requirements of keeping the factory going, all the low level, but the absolute basics, that there has to be janitors there, somebody open the door, somebody to stoke kerosene furnaces, however you stoke them, to fill them up, to clean up the place, that you've got to have that. Now before you say, well, they ought to keep up with the times and shift over, if it is already set up and operates, and the yellow people don't even have to fool with it. Why? If it is operating efficiently, why go in there and change it? Well, of course, if any of you are innately inclined to become bureaucrats, and I know that you want to argue the fact, and I don't have time to argue with people that belong in Washington, you should just simply see from one real view, the efficiency is not in changing over. If you have a whole system in operation and it just runs like clockwork, and you don't have to change the system, you don't have to increase the potency of the energy. If everything downstairs is going on well, my little joke that didn't go that big, you have got to be a living example of a dunderheaded bureaucrat to holler, hey, the damn thing ain't broke, so let's fix it. These two systems, these two brains, these two interpreters of information are operating simultaneously, but they are worlds apart. They're operating on different levels of energy. That my example of the difference between kerosene and electrical is not exaggerated at all. If it didn't strain the credulity of my picturization, I would say upstairs they were now working on the atomic energy level. But I'm telling you the difference Just imagine, upstairs they cannot run computers on kerosene. And you could say, well, downstairs, you know, it's a shame that down there it's city, it stinks, the environment's not good, there is not as good a payoff for the energy return for that which is consumed for the resources as there is up here. They can say that up there. But it is more efficient to leave things as they are down there. That has been the, I don't have to prove this, any of you that can begin to see, that has been the nature of so-called evolution of man, evolution of society. The growth, the expansion of civilization, of humanity, has been that. That's at the heart of me trying to point out to you that yesterday is not gone. There are uncivilized people in the world right now. If right now, I don't know it's true, but it's very likely true, that right now we now have no other absolutely feral person on the face of this earth. That now National Geographic, if not Jacques Cousteau, has finally stumbled up, speaking that phony baloney French accent of his, to the last poor schlemiel somewhere on an island that's never seen civilization, a TV dinner, a microwave oven, and by now Jacques has probably gotten there and it's all over. So that there is, the noble savage is no more. Let's say that. But the world is still full of noble savages, uncivilized people. The streets out here are full of them. The streets in here are full of them. They're still in operation. All right, now back to some of the things I wanted to point out that are not unknown at all, but they are not subject to a useful analyzation or mapping thus far in life. As I said, the first one I wanted you to hear was having to do with words. Now, you're dealing with words ordinarily. Let's let you take the passive role for a second. It's one of the five senses, hearing. Sound waves go through the air. One person says something directed toward you. It could be 2 and 2 is 4. Or it could be, fuck you. All right, the sound wave comes in. What is the difference in what was said? Why do the molecules, why to the vibrations and the tenor of what was spoken by the active participant in this dialogue, that they form, it says 2 and 2 is 4, the sound waves go in, and you say, all right, I can't be mad, I appreciate you correcting me, I had that wrong, thank you. At any rate, there is no apparent emotional reaction to it. Not anything of any doubt. You could say, well, thank you, or I knew that. But sound waves are set up into another order, and it gets in your ear, and somebody in here, somewhere in you, interprets this. The fuck you part is this. The yellow brain people, those that are more influenced by the yellow brain people, say, they don't have to be judges now, they say, no, something is wrong here. Anybody that lets words excite them, you're the kinds of people that too many of you get together and you start wars. You're going to destroy the planet. You beat up your children. You whip up on women. You mistreat your fellow man. Something is wrong. You're uncivilized. You don't have enough education. You're poor. You're the wrong religion. None of that. That's the kind of contrast needed. Those kind of verbal descriptions. They did not come from the red brain. The red brain knows what it's doing. Fuck you means, well, fuck you too. That's exactly. Push me, you're going to get pushed. The red brain uses words, but as far as it conveying what the yellow brain would call useful information, factual information, to say the very least, is secondary to its use of language, but it does use language. It hears language now that has been forced upon it. The yellow brain, however, takes words. Remember now, I'm talking at the extremes of people who are apparently run almost entirely by the yellow brain, that's what they hear. That seems to interpret almost all the information that they get in through the senses. Right now we're talking about taking in words and then using words. If if it does not convey information to them, it is either impertinent, that is useless, or with people not their sort, the unruly sort, if the words do not convey information, they appear to have some danger to them, that we should pass laws that strangers on the street, God knows we don't understand what's going on, but there's people not of our type, people that live in the city and neighborhoods we don't associate with, but those people, I keep hearing it over and over, they'll be standing in a bar and one guy will say, you bumped into me. Another guy will say, well, fuck you, look what you're doing, get out of my way. And suddenly we've got fights. We have to increase taxes to pay for charity awards. They're filling up it's a pain. We got to stop this. The yellow brain is speaking not a different language, but it is taking the language being spoken, and it uses it one way, either hearing that kind of red brain, let's say more red brain based verbiage, is either useless at the least, or at the worst, is potentially disruptive, dangerous. The red brain sees words, if they are simply conveying information, they would see it. Now let's try and switch over to another point of view, which all of you should be able to do a little bit. The pretty routine people, my good old bricklayers and carpenters and ditch diggers. What do they stand around and talk about? What do they read? What do they hear out in the street? If you ask a red brain person, if you ask your own red brain, what do you think about the invention of human speech if you get a red brain to discuss such as that? They'd say by and large something like, well, people talk too much. You know, like the kind of crap you just asked me. It would be, taking an extreme example, you might say, but the only reason it's true is because it's an extreme example. And the only reason it's an extreme example is because it is correct. It's what luck would a archetypical physicist have walking in a redneck bar? What kind of conversations could he carry on? And forget about fist fights and all that, just what kind of conversations? The red brain would hear the physicist, the good bricklayers, sitting there having a couple of beers, and the guy walks in and tries to say some comment about the game on TV, and then he starts talking about factual stuff. They find it to be irrelevant. Not dangerous, but they just simply find it to be irrelevant, to the point that they can get dangerous, like, won't you shut up or go somewhere else? But if he tried to talk to them like, well, hey, if I could, while the commercial's on, there's a new theory that just came out of MIT that I think some of you might be interested in, having to do with... Now, all of you know that this is lampooned, this is satirized in movies, literature, everywhere. It just seems to be just a cheap, easy shot to make to try to get a laugh in a movie or on a stage. But the only reason it does is because it is a correct reflection. It is a correct reflection of, to ordinary consciousness, what seems to be going on out there, but the only reason it seems to be going on out there, it is going on in here. That you've got people using words, and they might as well be talking two different languages. And it is not based upon their culture, it is not based upon their sex, their religion, their race. It is based upon what I am telling you. You go into the other senses, and you have got a similar situation. Let's take taste. The red circuit, a red brain person eats that which is necessary to sustain life. You would not find a red brain person being a gourmet. And why? Not education. Of course, all that fits, because you do not find uneducated gourmets. And on the other hand, you do not find itinerant bricklayers with a 5th grade education being gourmets. But here is what I want you to see. You get into the yellow brain, and they can develop taste that are not necessary for survival. they still must eat. If the yellow brain was suddenly all alone in charge of this entire organism and the red brain on vacation, the yellow brain would still have to feed itself. It would know that. It would remember the red brain goes in here and it opens a can or it drives up this window and says, give me one of those. The red brain has tastes that are limited to old established taste that can be correctly covered by my description. As they eat, the red brain directs the taste buds and all the nexus that flows therefrom from hunger to what to pick up, how much to eat, on the basis of surviving. You get into the yellow brain and it can start taking the information from the senses, now we're on taste, and go beyond that which is necessary for survival, and it becomes a pleasure, it becomes an adventure, it becomes an unestablished desire for new stimuli. And thus they become gourmets. They want to try new foods. They hear of a new way of fixing something. They will talk about it. They'll write articles, they'll write books, they'll save their money, they'll go on a trip, thousands of miles just to have that one dish. The red brain. Imagine red brain people, if they were to pay enough attention on the news, hearing about this, they think those bunch of, smart aleck Yankee dumb motherfuckers. I'm just trying to clean up part of what they'd say. Just to that. If they're standing at the bar and they saw suddenly it was on the news, and it was about all these gourmets that charter a Concorde and they fly to Paris to have this one meal and it costs $50,000. I don't have to tell you because all you people got red brains. But if you don't want to deal with that, you can imagine you're standing over there in the corner and seeing these bricklayers, and if they gave it any attention, you got to remember, to them it's mostly irrelevant. But if there's nothing else going, and they happen, a couple of them, to stand there and stare at it for a minute while they're waiting on a beer, the only comment would be something like, they'd look at each other and go, it's not dangerous. They don't feel threatened by it. It is just the height of impertinence. I mean, they're almost speechless. What can you say about something that dumb? They can't imagine spending, each person, they say spent $10,000 on this overnight trip. They can't even picture that. They'll never do that. They won't never have the money. But then to imagine, well, if I did have it, and it just doesn't compute. The red brain can't deal with, you would spend $10,000 and fly over there, and as best I can make out what they said. Now, if this red brain, if it talked about it this much and analyzed it, there was a piece of fish that they cooked some way, and plus they showed it was a real teeny little piece, real teeny. I mean, it wasn't like all the catfish you can eat for $4.99. All right. Trust me, there is much more to this than laughter, as you know. It is the refinement, and I'm going to run to a point now, there is no word for this because it is not normally mapped. But I'm going to say refinement because most of you should be able to take it from there and run off into a new territory. It is refinement, but it's going into another dimension of information coming in from the senses. That's why I took this time with taste. I thought we'd get most of you, but you'd get some little bit. Is the real gourmet. We're not making any judgment. It's just a hobby. But you do know that there are people, it's not just a hobby, it's their lifelong hobby. It's their vocation. But they have taken a basic input from one of the senses that the red brain just takes as a bare minimum. It is just, you got to get up and eat. You get hungry, you grab a burger. Or you grab whatever anybody's got. Hey, are you through with that? Give me half of it. And you eat it. We're not talking right or wrong, other than the fact that for a certain number of years, most individuals need to keep functioning, that life uses them, and so they got to have fuel. They got to have good old basic physical fuel to run. But then you get into the yellow brain, and it takes the same necessity. It takes the same kind of input through the senses. It has not changed magically. The desire, the need, the necessity to eat is still there, and individuals are made so that each individual prefers to eat something, as they say, I believe the term is, I like the taste of that. The taste. Gourmets It becomes what amounts to a refinement. It becomes a hobby. It is not necessary to stay alive to be a gourmet. Music. I'd already used words, but let me jump for a minute in what's called the arts. The red brain, I hate to keep repeating myself, but here I go, to say the least, has almost no interest in the so-called arts. Now, that's no secret. But out in the city, it is blamed upon the bricklayer's background. That if these poor people were not forced to drop out of school, these coal miners' sons and daughters, if they were not forced to drop out of school, if we could have gotten them all the way through college, they would now be down at the symphony on Pro Mozart night. You know, which is easy to say since it never happens, but it's easy to say that. If we could get them through college, they would probably even develop more refined taste. Surely in the Bach. But that's easy to say. If we could get more education stuffed in these people, they would be more inclined to help support our new library system without us having to vote new bonds every 10 years. They'd give money to the city trying to develop a new art gallery, an art museum. Red brain people, they hear that here's this big building they built downtown, and if they pay any attention, again, they're staying in the bar and it flashes on the news, grand opening of the John Blatter Memorial Museum. And they show it, and the guy, maybe he's taking a look, waiting on his beer, and they mention a figure like, and it came in a little less than they projected 10 years ago when it was started. It only cost $83 million. Which, the red brain, it knows from hanging around a yellow brain, it's got some idea $83 million, and it knows that it's making $250 a week. And $83 million. And if a red brain was going to spend any more time thinking about it, they'll have to tell you what it would think. It doesn't really find it dangerous, it just finds it like the people flying to Paris overnight for that little bitty piece of fish. And it cost them $10,000 a piece. An art museum. And it would think, well, I guess they're talking about, you know, paintings and that kind of crap. 83 million. So, from that view, what I want you to see, this is not a struggle, as it appears to be out in life, between the Philistines and the sophisticates. Now, if we can use that description, but it's not out there, it's in you. It's in each individual. The yellow brain, and apparently yellow brain people, are the ones that have developed, the ones that claim to have an appreciation for, those who will support fiscally and otherwise the arts. They rhapsodize about the arts themselves, that they have some intrinsic value to lift up the human spirit. It's a very common term. But can you see that from the yellow brain viewpoint, it believes? See, before I was using examples like people say. Society says if we gave these poor bricklayers more education, they would appreciate the arts. They'd be less violent, etc. To the yellow brain, it feels as though that is a sign that you need to be more civilized, more educated, that you do not appreciate the arts, because I can go and stand in front of, believe it or not, sometimes a pretty pedestrian Monet. I know, but sometimes I can stand when the light hits one just right, and I've had a good meal, and it almost brings me to tears. Now, if you could make a red-brained person stand there and hear that, do I have to tell you again what they would think? That the man said that he just got through having a gourmet meal, and when everything's just right, he can look at that kind of fuzzy-looking picture of some of those dancers or somebody, showbiz folks, and he said that it almost brings him to tears. And the bricklayer thinks, Jesus. And if we could keep it this simple, a yellow-brained person, if they saw this, they'd go, there it is. To me, is what they're saying, but they believe. This is the way the contrast is built in to humans. Each person believes that everybody else is basically, has the potential to be like me. That is, right. So the yellow-brained person thinks, well, I believe what they're expressing is commonly referred to as sarcasm, or, you know, the man almost laughed when I said that a fine painting at times can almost make me cry. And so the yellow brain correctly to it does feel, let me just use its terms, uplifted. That I can sit and listen to a Bach chorale, and I'm not even Catholic or Lutheran, and it can almost bring tears to my eyes. Or I go out and I feel, for some length of time, I feel more encouraged. I feel there's more hope for the future of man. And yet, I never find any bricklayers coming to a Bach concert. And now that you asked me the question, I realize I never will. You'd have to nail their feet to the floor. What kind of music do they like? To stay in one area, that we can make a real quick comparison. What does the red brain, what kind of music does it like? I can push it into a little more art, but it begins to break down. Because their biggest art, the field of the normal arts, as we would call them, the one that has the most immediate potential, possible appeal, would be music. And what does it have to be? It has to be that which apparently directly stimulates animal instinct, which is basically rhythm, and to push it a little bit closer to the yellow brain, it has to get into what you would normally refer to, people in the city, as emotional areas, country and western being the great example. That it's not just the rhythm now, that the words, the red brain would say, if it could talk like this, it'd say, I understand them enough that, you know, if you got to sing, that's my kind of words. Because what we're talking about now is the life of the guts, the life of the private parts, the life of the stomach, the life of the head. That is the head with a hangover. The gut reaction of being misused, a woman leaving, that you're horny, and of all the times your old lady had to go out of town, that kind of. If you're going to deal with words, it's got to be at that level. If we're talking about just music, the red brain is not talking about Bach, Mozart, not because of education, but because it has no ability to find stimulation. It is not wired up to find any stimulation from just music, without words, unless it stimulates the older, you know, what would amount to instinctive reactions as opposed to some logical, some sequentially logical yellow brain reaction to it. Any area of the arts, the reason I picked up music, you will not find the red brain people, to say the very least, reading much at all. Maybe a TV guide, maybe the back of a beer can. They do not read. And of course that is part of the, once you see it, it's good for, I guess, a momentary of going, like it's something that you thought had been worrying humanity forever, and once you see it, it's again, it's the beautiful situation, the contrast that cannot be resolved, the conflict that cannot be resolved, is the yellow brain saying, all right, red brain people, there's a prime example. If we could get these people more education, then of course they'd develop a taste for reading. If we could keep them in school, it'd just be a matter of time if we could just trick them, if we could pay them, if we could nail their little feet down to the floor and hold them in desk and get them to read a little bit. Oh, I know a bunch of them when we try to whip Hamlet on them. They go, oh, good, what does that mean? But wait, if we could keep them in school long enough, they would suddenly, it hit them. They would begin to develop a taste, and then they'd just begin to devour. I mean, it would be, Aristotle would fall. You know. Homer. They would run through everybody. They'd get right up to Spinoza. I mean, that's the way it is. I know that's the way it was with me, if we could just get them started. But there's the beautiful part. You can't get them started. The red brain cannot read that stuff. The red brain can read in a sense, I'm telling you. I'm not exaggerating. In a sense, the red brain can read. It knows what words are. But the red brain is not going to read much more of anything. It's not, no matter what you do to it. It's not going to read much more than maybe to sign up at Burger King to see what they want, to see what the price is, and assuming they got enough wherewithal, they can figure out whether they got enough in their pocket and how to make change. They might pick up TV Guide to see what's on, not really caring that much. But that is it. But notice the beauty of it. To keep this eternal asymmetry, this beautiful contrast that the yellow brain continually says, all right, that is part of the problem of the areas of the world, the areas of our city, the areas of other cities, other nations, our neighbors. If they all had more education, if they could develop a taste, which I'm sure they could if we could just keep them in the educational system. If they began to develop a taste and they understood the beauty, and they began off on their own, not because we just made them, although we got to start out that way, but then once they began to go home on their own and pull out some of the Elizabethan poets and begin to sit there instead of watching professional wrestling today on the set, to find on their own that they could begin to be in touch with the ages, that they could almost plug their minds into synchronization with the great minds of 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Once they had that taste, they'd give up reading comic books at the age of 40. They wouldn't be, they wouldn't be just reading these old true romance magazines. They would be home. And they wouldn't. But see, the beauty is, it can't ever be proven. It just always seems as though, from one brain to the other, that one of them is just slightly out of step, and especially the yellow brain, it always feels like we're just one day behind. If we could have just kept the red brains in school for another semester, another year, if we could just made them finish high school, and if we'd done that, I know we could have probably got a large percentage of them to go into college. They'd become more civilized, they'd be less aggressive, we would have less hostility in the world, we'd have less abuse, physical, one person to another, we would have less crime. And what they're saying is, if that is, being a human, I am an archetypical human, they don't come in more human than me. If they knew what they were doing, they'd say, what I am actually saying is if I was nothing but a yellow brain, if I was Lee Iacocca, that the world, my state, was Chrysler Corporation, and I was him, I could do without anybody working there. I wouldn't need anybody on the assembly lines, I wouldn't need any draftsmen, I wouldn't need anybody stoking up the furnaces. If it was just me, no labor problems, no strikes, wouldn't have to give anybody a raise, wouldn't even have to pay anybody. And in some way, magically, coming out from my armpit, out the back door of the building, these cars, this product, would come out with just me. All we need is the top man. Everybody else, you're fired. But it can't be done. There is part of the beauty again. There is part of the master stroke. Some other aspects about the red and yellow brains, as it were, the first and second order of sentient systems, is in the three-dimensional world. This is a fact. Some of this, by the way, some of you probably already jumped around. For a long time, there's a certain physiological, accepted physiological basis for what I'm talking about. They're not involved with this, medicine and science, but they just accept it as an evolutionary fact about the kind of development of the brain itself, the nervous system in man. So I'm just going to use part of what's an accepted fact, because that is the way it appears in the 3D world. I'm not arguing with that. And I'm not telling you, well, I'm telling you as always, it also goes in another direction. But you could look at the red brain as being older. And in the 3D world, it is older. And what you've got, among other things, besides just such things as two interpretations of information coming in the senses, you have a more basic conflict in that the red brain is now established in its mode of operation. It does not need any updating. It does not need an efficiency expert. It is not subject to change. It should not be subject to change in the ordinary world. As I said, it is the height of efficiency the way it is. That it got operating and then expanded another area, but there was no reason to go back, and as ordinary systems experts, I guess, would say, to try and update their operations. It's foolish. Would not be efficient. So you have a very basic conflict between a first-order system, a red brain, that by and large is desiring of calm, predictability. The information that comes in, it interprets. If it finds it to be pertinent, if it cannot escape it, it tries to interpret it and to use it in a way to foster within itself a kind of conservatism, a kind of predictability. The yellow brain, on the other hand, takes the same information and it tries to expand it. It tries to take it beyond whatever may be an immediate, apparent, physical pertinence. Whereas the red brain could be shivering to condense horizontal history real quick. We could say the red brain, through God knows how many days, years, hundreds of years, shivered and then found out that if it got into a hole in the ground, that it wasn't that cold. It might find out that if it found a dead animal somewhere and wrapped the skin around it, it wasn't that cold. Whereas you could take and go, but the yellow brain comes along and take that same kind of information, and within a matter of 10 or 12 years, go from crude generating systems to somebody developing an air conditioner, heat pump. It takes what was apparently a very direct, a very crude and basically necessary flow of information, stimuli, cold, heat, and the organism's reaction to it, and to jump from the crudest established patterns of, all right, when I get cold, I shiver, I try to get close to somebody, or I wrap up in something, or I might find a stone to get under. You know, the yellow brain, comparatively speaking, jumps into wait. And it gets a pencil and paper, and first thing you know, it has designed the floor furnace. You got to turn the tape over. What appears to be conflicts between people, what appears to be the internal conflict I've been referring to as a necessary contrast within the individual, can be seen as a natural outgrowth of having the first and second order of these sentient systems, and as it were, of having the systems almost literally having their own brain. You can see that as being the natural basis, the organic basis for all feelings of conflict. Everything from the feeling of, I've got the love of the gods working in me, and then I've got the despair and the hatred of the anti-gods, the rebellious angels in me. I've got a conscious mind, a civilized mind, and I've got an unconscious, uncivilized, subconscious mind, an untutored and unfettered id. Or there is these two parts of me. One of them seems to be lazy and shiftless, and then there's the other part of me that always dreams of making change and doing better. You can see it in a quite correct manner as being a conflict between the old established order that, were it not for a yellow brain, we wouldn't know any better. We wouldn't be standing here talking. But if it were not for that, the red brain could be running us quite adequately, be running us just as well as it could run a chimpanzee or a dog. We wouldn't be here, as I said, discussing it. We wouldn't know any better, as they say in the country. But you could operate at that basis. It happens with certain accidents, as I pointed out, or it happens if you ever undergo my, Phillips screwdriver and ball-peen hammer. All you got to do is just cut off certain areas of the brain, and you will fall back into what amounts to the arms and the care of the red brain, or the first-order system. And it can keep you alive, but you are no longer fit to be described as being human. But you can see the conflict is being between that and then what amounts to, in the 3D city, a usurper coming along. Because the more you are civilized, which most of you here, most of you getting this on tape, I guess I take the blame. I don't know how I ever put out the smells and aroma to just attract civilized people, but most of you are civilized. Most of you are just, I don't expect there, from the midst of people that stay with us any length of time, that any of you turn into mass murderers. I find out that you have killed off 17 of your maiden aunts and they're buried in your basement. Let's just say everyone who stays with us for 2 or 3 days, you're pretty civilized. So what you have had is a system that in a sense has already rebelled against the established order. Now this was mechanical, this happened before you undertook your own attempted rebellion. But it's as though the second order system has usurped the power of the first one. Not that the first one now has given up power. You got to remember that things operate simultaneously. And simultaneously doesn't cover it, as I've said. It's all possibilities that's already done, are still being done, hadn't been done, can be done, are not done, are still undone, are being redone, and it's all happening. It's all happening in you. It's not science fiction theory. But in the 3D view, the yellow brain has usurped the power of the red brain. In areas where the red brain cares, the battle still goes on. There are areas, as I point out, that the red brain does not give a damn. And it cannot be made to give a damn, and yet the yellow circuit talks about it. But it's the very kinds of things that I point out with the gourmets, the developing a taste for classical literature. The things that are irrelevant, the red brain does not feel it's been usurped. Not specifically. But then you get into areas. What are the areas wherein many of you believe that you are too emotional? Or some of you just wish that you weren't, quote, emotional. What are they? You got your own personal examples. What are the areas wherein many of you believe that you are too emotional? Or some of you just wish that you weren't, quote, emotional. What are they? You got your own personal examples. I can tell you what they are. There are areas wherein the red brain still has discernible interest in what's going on. And that's when people, ordinary people, say, I wish I wasn't so emotional. But what they're saying is, it's an area wherein the red brain still has a vested interest, but it is no longer fully in control. And the yellow brain is saying it should not be in control, and yet I still have yet to take to wrest full power away from it. That is what ordinarily passes for being an emotional person, or for a person being in an emotional situation. Several times back I tried to point out to you very quickly, to sketch for you at least, what's ordinarily referred to as problems with humans are not really problems. It's the inability to decide what to do in the situation that seems to be a problem. Did I have a problem here? Should I just tell my family I can't put up with any more of this stuff? Just look after yourself, and maybe I'll write you someday. Maybe I won't. That seems to be what I'm stuck with. God, what a problem. That's not the problem. The problem is you can't decide to do one or the other. Your family's not the problem. You're not the problem. It's the inability to move. It's the inability to satisfactorily act. So now what I want you to try and get a glimpse of is what passes for being emotional. What passes for being emotional problems is a place wherein the red brain still has a vested interest. We're not talking about anything that you have picked up socially, culturally. I am talking about that which the red brain, which the first order system, the old system, the basic system in you still has an interest. You didn't learn this anywhere. You were born with it. It has an interest, but it no longer is fully in charge of it. That the yellow brain now has the ability to exercise